In the last couple of sections, we've really gone in headfirst with Redux, so I just want to take a quick pause and review how our app is currently working. So this is a pretty complicated diagram of exactly what's happening inside our application right now. Let's break this down and walk through it step by step. First, when our app first boots up, Redux creates a new store, right, with that create store call, using the libraries reducer. The instant the store is created, it runs this reducer one time. So we get a piece of state called libraries, which is an array containing a list of objects. The reducer itself, when it runs, returns that array of objects, and each object represents one library that we eventually want to show up on our screen. Next, after we create the store, we pass it to the provider as a prop, where it's going to sit for the rest of the lifespan of our application. The provider is a React component that aids in communication between React and Redux. Next, the app component is rendered to the screen, which in turn renders the library list component. The instant that the library list component is about to render or about to appear on the screen, the connect function, which we just added in, so that connect helper right here, boots up and it says, okay, time for me to do my thing. The component that I'm wrapping is about to render. The connect function then reaches back up to the provider and says, hey, please give me access to whatever your current state is. Just let me know what your state is. The provider gives up the state that is contained within the store, and then the connect tag pumps it down into the library list after filtering it through map state to props. Okay, so again, that's a lot of steps right there. Let me just break that down one more time. When the connect helper first boots up, it says, oh, the library list is about to render. The connect helper goes up to the provider, says, can I have access to state? The provider says, sure, here you go. The connect helper calls map state to props with that application state, and then whatever object gets returned will show up as props down into library list down here. So the last step there is really key as well. The map state to props function runs and it returns an object. That object, like whatever it contains, whatever properties, whatever values, whatever data, is then passed as props to the library list. And that was the last step that we just verified inside of here, right? We console logged this.props and we saw that it contained this object right here, an object with a key of libraries and a value of the libraries that existed inside of our state. One thing I want to point out really quick is that, again, the term libraries is floating around a lot right here. This object right here that we returned when it showed up as props to our component, it had the key of libraries. It did not, this key right here can be absolutely anything that we want. So it can be libraries, it can be data, it can be data to show, whatever we want it to be. It does not necessarily have to be libraries just because the piece of state that we want to reference is state.libraries. I just chose to call it libraries because that is, a very reasonable name for the prop. On the other hand, on our state object, we have a very distinct property called libraries. So I could not say, of course, right here like state.data because our state object does not have a data property. I have to very specifically say state.libraries. Okay, so that's pretty much where we are at inside of our application right now. I feel like there might be a confusing item or two in this process, so I want to provide just a little bit of clarity on them. First, just to review, exactly what I just mentioned about the libraries. And second, the second interesting piece I want to draw your attention to here is that our reducer had produced some amount of state inside our app, even though we did not dispatch an action, right? So when our app first booted up and we console logged our state inside of map state to props, and then we later console logged it inside of our function right here, this libraries piece of state that came from our reducer, our library reducer over here, already had some data inside of it. So when our Redux application first boots up, it will automatically run all the registered reducers to accumulate some amount of initial state. So we always have to design our reducers assuming that they will be called like over and over and over again and at random points at time. So that's why that whole type system that we saw earlier is so important. The reducer needs to only change its data whenever it sees an action with a type that it cares about. In addition, we need to make sure that we respond to the application first booting up correctly. So when our app first boots up and it runs all the reducers one time, we have to make sure that we return some amount of initial state. In this case here, because we are just returning a very static list of data, just this array that is hard-coded into our application, it wasn't quite as big a deal, but when we go back and implement the selection reducer, it's something that we're going to need to think about a little bit, but we'll get there. Okay, I hope this was a good breather to review how our app is working right now. Let's continue on the next section by working a little bit more on the library list component.